Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to our Academy of Political Science Forum. These forums are held quarterly to showcase work published in the Academy's flagship journal, Political Science Quarterly. I'm Bob Shapiro. I'm president of the Academy of Political Science, and I'm also the editor of Political Science Quarterly. Um, we have a banner session today, recapping the last presidential election, and at the end, looking forward to current politics and the next election. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Professor Marilena Mantis, who's a professor of political science at Sacred Heart University, and she's also the associate editor and managing editor of Political Science Quarterly. And I'm going to turn the introductions further over to her. Marilena.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I extend my own welcome to our panelists, but also to members of the audience who are with us. And I'm excited to have you with you for today's forum. Today, we feature an article published in the fall 2025 issue of Political Science Quarterly entitled The 2024 Presidential Elections Small Wave Seismic Effect. We have with us the author of the article, Professor Gary Jacobson. Welcome. Gary Jacobson is Distinguished Professor of Political Science Emeritus at the University of California, San Diego. He specializes in the study of U.S. elections, parties, campaign finance, public opinion, and Congress. His most recent book is Presidents and Parties in the Public Mind. Welcome, Professor Jacobson.
Thank you.
Also with us is our discussant, Professor Alan Abramowitz. He is the Alvin Barkley Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Emory University. His expertise include election forecasting models, party realignment in the United States, and congressional elections. Welcome, Professor Abramowitz. We're happy to have you with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Our forum will be structured as follows. We will begin with a presentation of the article by the author, followed by comments and discussion between our discussant and the author. And then we will then move on to a question and answer session. Members of our audience will have the opportunity to enter questions. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit questions to us. The panelists will answer the audience questions towards the very end of our session. Welcome. We could begin, Professor Jacobson.
Are we ready then?
We are.
Okay. Thank you all for attending, and a special thanks for Bob Shapiro for inviting me, and for Marilena and Lauren setting things up, and for Alan, one of my very oldest friends in political science, agreeing to comment on the paper. The seismic damage in the title of this, in the title of the paper, I kind of underestimated at the time I was writing. Anybody who watches the news on a regular basis will see that on a daily basis, the Trump administration, elected in 2024, along with a Republican House and a Republican Senate, has engaged in an attempt at radically restructuring American and international politics, covering everything: trade, immigration, the environment, regulation, healthcare, civil rights, structure and staffing of the federal government. You can go on and on. The list grows by the day. And all along with this, the president showing contempt, basically, for any institution or set of rules that might limit his power, stand in his way, and especially standing in his way of using the legal system to go after and exact revenge on his critics and enemies, anybody who tried to hold him accountable for his past behavior. So I think American democracy is undergoing a critical test of its resiliency at present, and it's not entirely sure it's going to succeed. And the question that my paper addresses basically is, how did Trump get the opportunity to massively disrupt the national and international political orders? And my short answer, basic answer, it's that Trump's return to the White House is based on two fundamental pillars. The first is the unwavering support he's got from a substantial majority of ordinary Republicans Republican voters who simply have refused to acknowledge any serious wrongdoing of any kind on his part ever. The second was the willingness of enough swing voters unhappy with Joe Biden's performance, especially on the economy and immigration, to overlook Trump's crimes, to overlook his moral squalor in the promise of better economic times and fewer immigrants at the border. The first pillar explains how Trump got the nomination. The second largely explains how he won the general election. His victory was a narrow one, and another central claim of the paper is that nothing in the presidential or congressional election results justify claims of a mandate for anything beyond lower prices and tighter borders. He was given no mandate to dismantle large parts of the federal government or to restore the cultural and economic primacy of straight white Christian men. So the nomination, remarkably, Trump won the nomination despite 2 impeachments, the January 6th invasion and trashing of the Capitol, the loss of a criminal case and 3 civil suits, including one for sexual abuse, and additional indictments in 2 federal and 1 state court for election interference and illegal possession of classified documents. He was also a loser. He had lost to Joe Biden in 2020, and parties usually don't renominate losers. It doesn't happen that often. Trump was able to escape the ignominy of that loss, at least among his Republican partisans, by persuading a large majority of them that he didn't actually lose. His big lie of a stolen election, promulgated from day one, has been accepted by about 2/3 of ordinary Republicans, about 70% of the people who voted for him, and it continues to be accepted by them at that rate. So they didn't. He wasn't a loser in their mind, so he didn't have to justify being renominated, despite the fact that he was a loser. Acceptance of Biden's stolen election lie by his supporters was fundamental to his political resurrection, because it was connected so strongly to beliefs about other things having to do with his behavior surrounding the election and elsewhere. I began the paper with this quote, and it encapsulates in a kind of very stark way my argument about how Trump eventually won re-election. I assume you can always read it. You can all read it. I'll give you a minute to read it, and then I'll move on. This is someone who had voted for Biden in 2020, switched to Trump in 2024, and this was her reasoning. Okay. Now, among Trump's own supporters, what kept him in the game was the fact that they refused to believe anything he did. They largely refused to believe anything he did wrong. This is the proportion of Republicans in red who accepted or believed in his guilt in any of these cases: responsible for January 6th, should be impeached, election obstruction, classified documents, hush money, misvaluing property, sexual abuse. Only 25% of Republicans, and these are the ones with an opinion, will admit that he has ever done anything illegal. So there's the strong question as to where did this support come from? And I go into that in some detail in the paper. It has to do with identity politics, the strong bonds that Trump has managed to forge with a large segment of the American population, not a majority by any means, but it's a substantial section, who feel besieged economically and culturally by globalism, immigration, feminism, secularism, the growing ethnic and racial diversity of the country. He's voiced and validated their resentments, grievances, and fears. And these are of people who feel ignored by the political establishment, the cultural establishment, even the economic establishment in both parties. He's succeeded in persuading millions of disaffected Americans that they, like him, have been treated unfairly, that he is on their side, that his enemies are their enemies, and that attacks on him are attacks on them. That this foray into identity politics has been very successful, and Trump has left his supporters on these various issues um, with the stark choice between believing him or believing the information that's negative about him. And a very large proportion have decided to believe him rather than news reports or any other sources of information that suggest he might not deserve their support. Now, this helped to keep his support going as he sought re-election. This is data on Trump's favorability level, proportion with favorable opinions of Trump over the course of his career in office and afterwards. And you can see that there's a steep upward shift among Republicans in the last year leading up to the election. As he was indicted and convicted, his support only went up among this group. And this resulted in his domination of the Republican primaries. Initially, Ron DeSantis, initially in late 2022, he was actually behind Ron DeSantis in some of the Republican pre-election polls. DeSantis was unable to exploit this initial advantage at all. And by the time the election year rolled around, Trump was in full control. He won the nomination easily. He lost only 2 states. He got like 97% of the delegates, something like that, 94%. And he was elected easily over his 2 strongest opponents, who turned out to be not very strong at all. So Trump managed to keep his Republican support regardless of what had happened to him, regardless of what happened on January 6th, and that resulted in his renomination. On the Democratic side, they had their problems. Their chief problem was Joe Biden, that he was not especially popular, and among Democrats, majorities didn't want him to run for re-election or wanted someone else as a candidate rather than Joe Biden. And this he won the nomination handily nonetheless, because there was never any consensus on who the people who didn't want Biden did want. He sort of won by being the last man standing, in a sense. Of course, Democrats didn't want him renominated because they wondered about his physical and mental capacity to win re-election and to serve again, and that their doubts about him or worries about them were underlined dramatically in the first debate he held with Donald Trump, in which he was unfocused, seemed feeble, looked very much not up to the task of being president. And as a result, under pressure from Democratic donors and Democratic members of Congress who feared a debacle if he were at the top of the ticket for their party, persuaded him to resign, and he did so in favor of Kamala Harris in July. Now, Harris hadn't been particularly popular among Republicans, or among her party, or among independents until she became the candidate. And when she became the candidate, she became the only viable alternative to Donald Trump, and that helped her fairly dramatically in terms of her favorability numbers. As you can see, they jumped sharply after she won after she replaced Biden as the nominee, especially among Democrats and independents. The Republicans and Donald Trump in particular were not happy about the replacement of Biden with Harris because they had optimized their campaign to run against Biden, and they were discomfited by it to the point where Donald Trump was kind of fantasizing about Trump coming to the convention and claiming the nomination, despite all that had happened. Of course, that didn't happen, but there was a debate after the nominations eventually between Harris and Trump, which showed that Trump was wise to want Biden rather than Harris, because Harris won the debate. She won it by peppering Trump with points that pricked his ego and got him to get into his usual rhetorical flourishes, his lies and so forth, sort of crowned by his claim that that Haitian immigrants were eating dogs and cats from the neighborhood, things of that sort. She was a hands-down winner. In every poll had her winning over him. Even some Republicans admitted that she had dominated. But that turned out to make her a viable candidate. But that was the high point of her campaign, and it was the high point because she faced basic fundamentals that worked very strongly against any Democrat in 2024, including her. The problem was the economy, and the problem with the economy had been inflation. This is a chart that tells you a lot. Inflation is red. It goes up and reaches a 9% in June of 2022 before falling almost as fast back down to about 3%. At the same time, unemployment, the blue line, was coming down and stayed low throughout. So unemployment was in good shape. Economy was getting better, but people's views of the economy didn't improve much. Their green line is proportion saying the economy was actually getting worse throughout this period. About 50% consistently said that. And the brown line is the 40% that said it was in poor shape, the worst possible category. So the hangover of inflation was powerful enough to sour voters on the economy consistently thereafter. And the reason's pretty obviously inflation goes up, it comes back down, but prices don't come down. They just don't go up as fast. So everybody was feeling the pinch from having increase in the price of groceries, gasoline, housing, travel, you name it. Restaurants all went up. Inflation comes down. They didn't. Real incomes didn't keep up with that. And so there was a considerable amount of economic discontent. The economy became the dominant issue in the election, and Trump exploited it pretty effectively, had about a 10-point lead in who would do best on the economy. The second most important issue was immigration, and Trump also had the lead on that. The sharp increase in immigration during the first 3 years of the Biden administration put the issue on the agenda and put it in a way that was damaging to the Democrats. Support for the border wall, which had been a minority position for years, now became a majority position, and people did not like what he was doing about immigration. So with those two things in his favor, Trump managed to win the national election. Those were the dominant things determining his victory. It was a victory he won by winning 5 states that Biden had won in 2020, and actually 6 states that Biden had won in 2020, including the 5 states that had switched to Biden from Trump in 2020. They're on this map. It was a real victory, but it was a narrow victory. It was a narrow victory in the sense that the total votes swung to Trump by 3 percentage points. He went from having about 46.8% to 46.8% to 49.8% of the national vote. He didn't quite win a majority, but he won a larger share than Republicans had in recent years. Most of that shift took place through a loss of Democratic votes rather than a gain in Republican votes. That is, Trump was up about 3 million above 2020. Harris was about 6 million below Biden's total in 2020. Across the states, the average gain was 2.2 percentage points. In the 6 states that switched from Biden to Trump and gave him the Electoral College victory, his average gain was 1.9 percentage points. So you can see from this chart that there was a swing against the Democrats, but it was much larger actually in the states that the Democrats won, that Harris won. Places like California and New York dropped off. In the states that made the difference, it was a much smaller shift. And in fact, Harris's vote went up a little, Trump's vote went up more. So his strength was in winning those states. by a relatively small margin, but enough to give him this across-the-board victory. Now, if we look at this in historical context, we look at the victories where the out party replaces the in party in a presidential election. Usually, there's a pretty big swing. It used to be really big in the 20th century, somewhat smaller in this century. But if you look at the last three elections where Trump won, then Trump lost, then Trump won, the national swing has been the average swing across states has been quite low. The standard deviation of that swing, that is how much variance there is across states, has been extremely low. It's a very nationalized movement, and there's very high correlation between the state vote in this election and the state vote in the previous election. So this shows us how nationalized presidential politics has become, and how stable it's become, how how small the swings are, and how unwilling voters have been to change their mind. Now, party loyalty was very high in 2024, over 95% in the major polls, the highest level of party loyalty in recent years. Republicans were a little bit more loyal than they had been in 2020. But the more important change was that the proportion of Republicans in the electorate had gone up about 3 points between 2020 and 2022. If you look at those big surveys that ask the party ID question, and you compare the two elections, Republicans clearly there were more Republicans in this electorate than in the previous one. But that change, as it turns out, took place largely by 2022. It was a negative reaction to Biden rather than a positive reaction toward Trump that is most strongly associated with this shift toward the Republicans. Now, Trump also did better among minority voters and younger voters than he had done in 2020. And this was an important change that people noticed. But it was very strongly related to the economy. The dark brown columns here are those for people who said the economy was much worse, as opposed to better or same or somewhat worse. And you can see among the minority voters who swung to Trump, there's a very strong relationship between their views of the economy and how they decided to vote. Same goes for independents. Even those Democrats who bolted to Trump were much more likely to think that come from the group that thought the economy was worse off. Similarly, on the border, support for the border wall was strongly related to swings by Black and Hispanic voters to Trump in 2024. You can see from this, and also the economy was crucial among younger voters swinging to Trump in 2024. Interestingly, the swing to Trump among minorities did not show up nearly as strongly in House and Senate elections, suggesting this had a lot more to do with Trump than the general attraction of the Republican agenda. Now, if we turn to the House results, again, the House results argue strongly against an interpretation of the election as a support for Trump's agenda. They actually lost one House seat. They would have lost control of the House if it hadn't been for a partisan gerrymander in 2023 in North Carolina, which added 3 seats to the Republican column. The swing to the Republicans between 22 and 2024 in the House would average 0.4 percentage points. They ran about 0.1 percentage point ahead of Trump. It turned out to be a highly nationalized election, as they have been in recent years, as the Table 7 show. Very high correlation, 0.987 between the House and congressional vote. Only 16 of 435 districts delivering split results, with very high levels of party line voting and very high levels of straight ticket voting, the value of incumbency shrunk to almost nothing, only 1.2 percentage points. Incumbents did very well because they were all running in, most of them were running in districts that supported their party at the presidential level. But of those seats that did change party hands, and these, including among the 11 incumbents, 11 incumbents who lost, all but one of them, 10 out of 11 incumbents, 16 out of 17 overall, all of them went to the party of the presidential winner in the district. So it was a very highly nationalized kind of election. Trump didn't have any coattails, that he didn't pick up anything beyond what they already had, basically. But his success helped keep the Republicans in the majority in the House. In the Senate, I'll do this very briefly. The Senate seats up for election were very difficult. It made it very difficult, if not impossible, for the Democrats to hold the Senate. There were 3 states that have been won by, they had to defend 3 states won by Trump in 20 and 24. In very red states, they failed. They also had to defend 5 states where Trump had lost in 2020, but defeated Biden in 2024. Republicans managed to win one of those, but Democrats held on to the other 4. Again, this is evidence against any kind of claim of a mandate. This was not an endorsement of the Republican regime at all. Nonetheless, that's what we got. It has been making radical changes in national politics. And the question then becomes, how are voters going to respond to this in the future? Well, right now they're responding in a way suggesting extremely polarized responses, which you see in all the surveys about anything having to do with Trump. But by and large, his policies have not been popular successes, partial exception of immigration, but only partial, certainly on tariffs, inflation, government, reordering the government, foreign policy. His ratings have been relatively low nationally. He's the highest thing. The thing he's highest rating he gets overall is on immigration, lowest on inflation. The 2 things that mattered most in the election. But notice Republicans still remain highly supportive of him. Even though only 72% think he's doing well on inflation, he's still 86% supporting him. Democrats, even though some of them are more pleased with some of his moves on immigration, his overall approval ratings in about single digits. What's the key here is the independents. Their ratings of him and his performance have been unusually low. Usually they fall more closely in between what Democrats and Republicans want. This time they're closer to the Democrats than for any president previously. And these are the people whose votes matter most in a period of very high-level party line voters. How are they going to swing? They have been swinging against Donald Trump since he was inaugurated. This is the update of that chart I showed you earlier. The line shows when Trump won election. The green line is the proportion of independents I think he's doing that have favorable opinions of him. And you can see that's gone down quite steeply since he was nominated, since he won re-election. It's down to the lowest levels of his presidency. And this shows up also in the pre-election polls asking people if the election were to be held today, would you vote for the Republican or Democrat? Remarkably, independents are giving the Democrats 58% of the vote on average in the 50 or so polls. These have been taking place since the beginning of the year. Now, that's a remarkably large number. Usually it's about 50-50 among independents. That's what it was in 2018, 2020. So right now, it looks like the current response to to this reactionary revolution that we're watching is that Republicans are still very happy with it. He hasn't lost support from his base yet on this kind of from what he's doing. Democrats never liked it very much and like it even less now, but the independents are the ones who seem to be souring and who may be decisive in 2026. So with that, I will turn it over to Alan.
Thank you, Professor Jacobson. We're ready for your comments, Professor.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to say that thank you all for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And I'll have a number of things to say about Gary's paper, but I want to start off by saying that this is a really terrific paper. And if you're looking to read one article, one paper that's going to provide you with an overview of what happened in the 2024 elections, this is the one I would tell you to read. It covers so much territory here, first of all, it's as usual with Gary. It's such an impressive data collection exercise. Gary has pulled together just a vast amount of survey data, but also aggregate level data, to provide us with this really remarkable overview of what happened in the 2024 election. So it's just terrific. It really shows us, so clearly what the swing to Trump was about, that it really was more than anything else about the economy, stupid, as they like to say, has been said before, especially among non-white and younger voters. So that's the sort of their bottom line to me is this shift to Trump reflected more than anything else discontent with the economy, discontent with the Biden's and the Biden administration's conduct of our policies on the border and on immigration. And it shows it very, very clearly. So I want to move on from there and say that I think Gary makes a very important point about the role of what I've called and others are now calling negative partisanship, and that is the idea that views of the opposing party and its leaders on both sides have become increasingly negative. There's something verging on almost hatred of the in fact, sometimes not just verging, but extending to hatred of the opposing party and its leaders. And so we see in Gary's data pretty clearly that there was a subset of Republicans who had reservations about Trump. I think when you said, well, 25% of Republicans accepted the idea that he had, in fact, done something illegal, and you would think, well, that 25%, just given that, there would have been a larger rate of defection among Republicans. But the reason there wasn't is because even among that group, views of the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders were overwhelmingly negative, and so negative that basically they were unwilling to cross party lines. And that's what we were seeing over and over again. Even among Republicans who harbored doubts about Trump, voting for a Democrat was simply unthinkable. When you ask, what explains this unwillingness or inability to recognize the reality of what Trump had done, things like what happened on January 6th, I think one thing I would bring in also in there is the role of the media, and particularly the role of partisan media and of conservative media. The fact that the vast majority of Republican voters are getting their information predominantly from Fox News and other even more conservative news sources, it helps to explain why they're not seeing the same reality that the rest of us are. And so I think that's a very important part of this. I want to bring up the distinction between short-term and long-term sources of electoral change. So this paper focuses primarily on the short-term sources of electoral change. What changed between 2020 and 2024, and that's extremely interesting to see what happened there. What drove some voters from Biden to Trump, in particular between 2020 and 2024. And that's where assessments of economic conditions, as well as discontent with the conditions on the border and immigration, was was crucial, especially with younger non-white voters. Can Trump and Republicans hold on to those gains in this year's elections, and especially the midterm elections next year and moving forward to 28? Obviously we don't know, but some of the evidence Gary presents at the end of the paper there suggests that it won't be easy for them to hold on to. It may not be easy for them to hold on to those gains. I want to add one other important short-term factor to the economy and the border, and not Gary certainly doesn't ignore this, but he emphasizes it quite a bit. But I would like re-emphasize it, and that is Joe Biden. Okay, so Joe Biden's extremely low approval rating, around 38% at the time of the election, severely hampered Harris's campaign. Obviously, the fact that she was his vice president also, made that connection even more difficult to overcome. No incumbent party, I believe, has won a presidential election with an approval rating that was underwater in the modern era. When we have this polling data available, and Biden was far underwater. And the discontent with Biden, of course, was not just about policy, based on policy, but it was also based on this perception that he was not up to the job, and I think a resentment of the fact that the Democratic Party leaders were so reluctant to accept that fact and to replace him, and it took so long for that to happen. And so Harris started off with 2 strikes against her in that regard. I want to add one other question about the economy was obviously very important here, but when you look at that chart that Gary puts up, showing on the one hand the economic trends, on the other hand the opinions of the economy at the same time. Of course, what's striking to me, and I think to many others, is the disconnect between the two. So the economy was getting better. We saw that during 2024, especially the second half of the year. Inflation came way down, unemployment remained low, real incomes were growing. Yet the perceptions of the economy remained very, very negative. And that's something that I think would be very interesting to try to understand or explain. What explains? Usually those two move together more closely. In this particular election, it seems like they did not move very closely together. One other question that I think needs attention here with regard to what happened in 2024. And again, it's something that Gary shows in the paper, but I think something that could receive more attention, but it's difficult, really, the data make it difficult for us to understand, and that's the role of turnout in driving electoral change. So when we talk about swing voters, on the one hand, swing voters can mean those who switch parties between elections, and Gary shows some evidence about those types of swing voters. But another source of change, of course, is voters who either dropped out between 2 elections or entered the electorate. And what we saw in 2024 is that it seems like Democrats disproportionately dropped out, and the newer voters who came in, the first-time voters, those who were coming back, or first-time voters, were disproportionately Republican. A lot of Democratic voters seem to have dropped out, but particularly in states that Democrats won. That's one of the interesting phenomena here. You look at states like New York and New Jersey and even California, and you see, the actual Democratic vote was way down. And it would be nice to have some panel data that would allow us to actually look at that, what was driving turnout. Maybe the ANES data will allow us to do that. There's a panel there's a 20 to 24 panel, I believe, in that. I haven't tried to look at it yet, but that might allow us to look at that. Finally, I want to say that even as we focus on the sources of the swing between 20 and 24, as I suggested earlier, there are long-term changes in the composition and behavior of the electorate that are important in trying to understand what happened in 2024 and the outlook for future elections. And one of those that especially interests me is the rise of working class republicanism. And this is reflected, in Gary's analysis and Gary's data, of course. But what we've seen over a fairly long period of time, this goes back even before Trump, of course, and that is the inversion of the traditional class foundation of the American party system, and the increasing support for the Republican Party among particularly non-college educated white voters. some suggestion that this might now be, we might be seeing this among among working class non-white voters as well. I don't personally think, and the data that I've looked at don't show that really happening, but it's an open question. And the question is, why is this happening? Why have we seen this, and what, and of course, all sorts of speculation and advice being offered to the Democrats about how they can deal with this, what the Democrats need to do, how can they win back these white working class voters. Often the message, the suggestion is that a message of economic populism is what's needed. The Democrats need to figure out a way to appeal to recognize and the level of economic discontent that has emerged among this group of non-college white voters, and try to find a message that appeals to them. I don't personally think that's going to work because I don't think it's primarily economic. I think it's more based on racial and cultural conservatism, and that makes it much more, and that's going to make it more challenging. But the other side of the coin, of course, is the Democrats have made gains among college-educated voters, which have partially at least offset the losses that they've suffered among the non-college white voters. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll be happy to follow up with any, I like to hear what Gary's reactions, and then, obviously we'll see what kinds of questions we have coming in.
Well, I'll just say, Alan, thank you for filling in things that I left out, and reminding people of things that are implicit, if not always explicit, in my analysis, especially the notion of negative partisanship, which I think is crucial. It's been a crucial fact since Trump won in 2016. It was negative partisanship that carried him through in 2016. And it certainly helped him in 2024. I have another paper in which I actually look at the data from Republicans who say, yeah, Trump did this. Yeah, Trump was guilty, and so forth. And in those same polls, like 3% say they're going to vote for Biden. These were Biden era polls. That, yeah, they admit that he's a crook, but they can't vote for Biden. Why? Because they think he's even worse. And of course, this is deliberately cultivated by the president. This is their line these days. Their opponents are horrible, terrible, treacherous people. And therefore, you can't possibly, you have to support us even if you don't like us because our opponents are so much more awful than we are. Yeah. And that's been a successful strategy for them.
Exactly. Our opponents are a bunch of pedophiles, right?
Except radically left pedophiles.
Maybe it turns out
cat eaters, etc.
Yeah.
Thank you both. We have just a couple of questions from the audience, so I will share one, and you should both feel free to go ahead and respond to it. And just a reminder to the audience that if any questions, if you have any questions to be asked, please put them in the Q&A chat. So the question is, how do we know that it was economic and immigration issues and not culture war issues? For example, DEI, defund the police, gender fluidity that drove the slight move of moderate voters to Trump?
We don't know for sure. All we can do is look at the data and see how strongly economic attitudes were connected with the vote. Now, some of that's endogenous in the sense that people who really don't like Biden are going to say the economy is terrible no matter what, but it's not entirely endogenous. And if you look at cultural attitudes in the same equation with economic attitudes, generally the economic attitudes will dominate. But clearly in some, very close election, if on the margins, Harris is being able to run ads against Harris as supporting transgender people is helpful, maybe. But I think Harris's worst problem was the response she gave when she was asked, would you do anything different from what would you do differently from what Joe Biden has done? And she said, I can't think of anything. This was a question on the economy. I think that was far more damaging to her than her past support for trans people.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in terms of explaining the short-term swing between 20 and 24, that the economy was primary, immigration was also somewhat important, and just general discontent with Biden's performance as president, and that these sort of cultural issues were secondary. Now, in terms of explaining longer-term shifts in attachment to the parties, that's where I think that cultural and racial issues are much more important. In fact, you find that the alignment now between partisanship and attitudes on these sort of cultural and racial issues is far, far closer now than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. So that's been a very significant long-term change.
Another question asks you to reflect a little bit on the new data that you included in your presentation that was not a part of the original paper regarding the approval rating. So what factors do you think account for the low approval ratings, especially among independents post the 24 election?
I would say inflation, continuing inflation. The one thing that was the most important, it was obviously very important to a lot of swing voters. They were unhappy with inflation. They thought Trump was going to get rid of it, and he hasn't. Not that he could easily wave his hand and make it go away anyway, but his policies have, especially on tariffs, have tended to exacerbate it, and will make it worse in the future. So like 70% of the population of voters think that tariffs are going to cost them money, that they're going to be worse off because of tariffs. It's going to raise inflation and raise prices. And it's more like 85% or 80% of independents think that, 90% of Democrats, of course. So I think that policy has not been popular. I think in general, his immigration efforts, the data on this are very interesting. If you just ask people, should illegal immigrants be tossed out of the country? You get 50, 55% saying yes. If you then ask questions about, well, should we do it? Should we get rid of people who've been here for more than 5 years? It gets down to 32, 33% say yes. We get down to the DACA kids. It's 28, 29%. So the overall notion, we got to close our borders. Closing the borders, sealing the borders is pretty popular. Getting rid of illegals, undefined, is pretty popular. When you get down to the details of it, it's not very popular. And that's why he's underwater even on immigration these days. So it's what he's been doing on tariffs, on immigration, on attacking universities, going after science funding, medical funding, and so forth. Firing large segments of the federal workforce. These things have not been popular. And so his numbers stay as high as they are because Republicans are still buying into all of it. They're 100%, 88% behind Trump on this stuff. But the rest of the population who is not in his camp takes quite negative views of all these things. And that's what's pulling him down. But independents in particular. Democrats are already rock bottom. You can't go any lower. But independents are movable, and they've been moving downward.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Gary just said. I mean, I think it's in many areas, what people are seeing Trump do, then the policies he's carrying out are unpopular. The tariffs, the way they're dealing with immigrants, the mistreatment of people, the violence that's being that people are seeing in the way they're handling the deportations. All of these things are unpopular, and of course his policies on healthcare and is unpopular. We'll see what comes out of this government shutdown. Who ends up coming out on top of that. But at least in the preliminary polling, it looks like Democrats do have a good strong issue there with the canceling of the healthcare subsidies. Is something that the public seems to be on their side on. So in a range of issues, but you're right. I mean, there's a floor. It seems like there's a floor for Trump's approval rating right now that's right around 40%. And that reflects the fact that he maintains the support of 85 to 90%, or sometimes a little higher, of Republicans. His support has dropped among independents. It has remained extremely low among Democrats, but it stays up there, and that because of Republican loyalty. And that is crucial to it. That's allows him to maintain the loyalty of Republicans in Congress. And so what we're seeing here is that it's almost impossible to get Republicans in Congress to check Trump's actions, because they look at their own base and they see support for Trump. And the vast majority of them don't care very much about what Democrats think. They don't care even much what independents think. They just care about what their own base thinks, and they don't want to upset Trump. They don't want to be primaried. And that's why they remain so steadfastly loyal to Trump despite his overall unpopularity.
One more question. How much of the support for Trump, both among, quote, true believers, end quote, and those who converted, was or is a result of voters believing false information?
Certainly, sticking with him requires denying all sorts of factual realities. And there's a concept that I came across in doing this paper called motivated ignorance. That is, you're motivated to remain ignorant because if you are enlightenment, knowing things threatens your identity, in the sense that if you think of yourself as a strong Trump supporter in a community of strong Trump supporters, it's really disconcerting to face the possibility that you are wrong, and that he has in fact been guilty of various crimes and high misdemeanors and so forth. And so you reject the possibility of even enlightening yourself. So it's motivated ignorance, and that keeps the solid group on his side. On the ones people who voted for him despite reservations about his character, they were saying, okay, we're voting about the nature of the times. We expect things to be better. The economy was good under Trump before COVID. I think he would have won re-election if it hadn't been for COVID, on the basis of the economy at that time. So they look back to that as a positive era. If he cannot deliver it now, then they're not going to stick with him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, and I would point to the role of conservative media also playing into this. Again, the reality that Trump supporters are seeing for the most part is not the same reality that the rest of us are seeing. And being part of a community also. And I think when you think about, people want to remain in good stead with their friends and neighbors who are, by and large, in most parts of the country where Trump dominates, they're Trump supporters. If you go up to, a little bit north of Atlanta, where I am, into North Georgia, it's Trump country, and the folks up there, would be to support Democrats now would be you'd be perceived as you'd be an outcast. Nobody wants to be an outcast, so it's very difficult to pull them away. The one issue where I think we're seeing some risk to Trump, however, is this Epstein issue. Where they primed the voters for that for so long. That there's going to be all this stuff. We've got all this stuff on Democrats and on the liberals that you hate, and now all of a sudden it's like, no, we don't have anything. There's nothing there. Don't look at that. I think that's where there is a little bit more risk to them that if it comes out, that in fact, well, we know Trump's in the files, but just a matter of what he's in what way. That could probably possibly pry some support away.
It's possible. There's
not sure.
data. There's data on. Do you approve of Trump's handling of the Epstein case? Half the Republicans don't approve of it. It's like 40% approve, 40% disapprove. But in the same polls, 85% approve of his overall job performance. So it hasn't pulled him down yet. Further revelations conceivably could, but he will deny them, declare it's fake news. And a lot of his followers will accept that as the truth.
Yeah.
They believe him rather than anybody else.
Yeah, I think that's right.
We have a question that asks you to kind of think ahead a little bit. So what are your thoughts on the move by Republicans in Texas to eliminate blue districts in 2026 and other states that will make it harder to have Democrats take control of majority in the House next year?
I haven't crunched the numbers on this yet. If California goes the way of Texas and remove some Republicans, like the Texans are going to remove some Democrats, it'll probably be close to a wash. I don't know how much difference Missouri is going to make, or some of these other states, 1 or 2 seats. If there is if the reaction to Trump is a normal one in a midterm election, given current conditions anyway, then the Democrats will pick up a lot more House seats than the handful they need to take over, despite redistricting. If it's very, very close, then yeah, at the margins, every one of these seats matters. So I think the midterms are going to be fascinating in that respect. At the APSA meetings, people were predicting a Democratic victory. And even in the Senate, which I think is really a stretch, given the configuration of states that are up. But I think it will be actually a profound test of which direction Americans really want to go in, because there can't be any question in the upcoming election that if you're voting for a Republican, you're voting for the Trump program. And we'll see if a majority of people will do that.
Yep.
Or a majority of people, districts will do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the redistricting, the mid-cycle redistricting, is not likely to make a big enough difference. Could swing a few seats one way or the other. The Republicans, there's a bit of a risk in what they're doing in Texas, because, when you got to move voters from one place to another, and you're taking some Republican voters out of some districts that will become less safe for them, and some of the districts are in South Texas, which swung toward Trump because Latino voters down there swung toward Trump. Latinos nationally have swung away from Trump, since the election. And so it's not certain, I think, that those districts will vote for Republicans. Anyway.
Yeah, there's a lesson from a redistricting in, I think it was Indiana back in the 70s. The Indiana legislature had a very clever gerrymander that was supposed to pick up 3 seats. They cut it so close, they ended up losing 3 seats.
Yeah.
The 1974 election happened to them. So there is a danger in cutting it too close.
Yeah. I think that the term for that is dummy mandering. So we could end up seeing some of that. But I don't think this, I agree with Gary that the Senate's going to be very difficult given the seats that are up. Democrats would have to win back not only North Carolina and where they have a decent shot, and Maine where they might have a chance, but then you're looking at states like Ohio and Iowa,
Texas,
which are pretty unlikely unless there's just a huge national swing.
Yeah.
And one final question as we're approaching the end of our hour and the end of the session. Do you think there is something exceptionally unique to this moment in American politics, or do you believe that there are lessons that could be learned from the past, or traces of patterns that you have seen before? And how does that perspective kind of inform your understanding of what is happening and what is to come at this moment?
Oh, I think, at least in my lifetime, we're in an unprecedented situation. On the other hand, I remember the 1960s, where we were rioting in the streets and marching on the Pentagon. It was a very stark division over the Vietnam War. The difference then was that the division was within parties as opposed to between them. It wasn't a strictly partisan division, that everybody lining up on one side or the other. And I think that kind of mitigated the kind of conflict. But we had a lot of violence and considerable amount of destruction at that time. We survived it. Hope we survive this as well.
I think Gary's exactly right there, that the difference, that those were very divisive times. There was a lot more violence going on than we've seen recently, but it didn't coincide nearly as much with partisanship. And so that, I think, made it possible ultimately to bring down Nixon, for example, because you had Republicans who were ultimately willing to turn against Nixon and go against him. I think you know, and that was true in the McCarthy era as well. I think when you think about the kinds of efforts to suppress dissent then, you almost have to go back, I think, to the pre-Civil War era to come up with a time when there was such an overlap in intense polarization combined with, I guess, where it was highly correlated with partisanship, and in that case, of course, with region, where we ended up in a civil war. So I don't think we're going to have a civil war, because the regional division, you know, the geographic divisions are not that clear cut. But how we get out of this is certainly not clear. But the midterm elections will tell us a lot, I think.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for being here with us today. Thank you, Professor Jacobson, for the article that inspired this wonderful discussion. And we could resume after the midterm election. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye-bye.